Welcome to Under the Rug at Work, where we shine light on things that are normally swept under the rug. I'm your host, Nicole Turnbull, and today I'm chatting with Tammy Howell about fatigue. Tammy is the Managing Director of Core Health Consulting, the author of The Real Men's Toolbox, which I have a copy of and a personally signed one. Thank you so much. And you're a registered nurse. Tammy, I don't know how you've done it all because you've also been on many TV shows and morning newses, and your bio, we could honestly go on for an hour just talking about that. But perhaps for people who maybe haven't met you before, can you share a little bit about your background and what led you to focus on fatigue and well-being?
Yes. Hi, Nicole. Thank you for having me on your podcast. Um, I started, it was quite interesting. My background was intensive care nursing, and I was working in Prince of Wales in Randwick for a number of years. And it was something where I started to have a look at, my normal 12-hour shift. I would look at a patient scenario, and it could have been that they've been in for a motor vehicle accident, or they've had an illness that was ignored for a while before it was diagnosed, or they lived in country, rural New South Wales, and it wasn't picked up on seriously enough or soon enough. And then suddenly they're in an emergency scenario in a helicopter down to us. And I used to look back and think, how would they have not known that they were this unwell, at that point when it was a chronic illness?
Yeah.
And it was having grown up in Muswellbrook, which is, I wouldn't call it rural by any means, but still a small country town, 16,000 people when I was a kid, maybe 12,000 as a child. But so many people just didn't have access to services and things that you and I might take for granted if we're living in cities or closer communities like Newcastle, Melbourne, Sydney, whatever it might be. But basically, I went from ICU in Sydney to wanting a break, having worked in 12-hour shifts, doing rotating rosters, night shifts, day shifts. My body was going, hello, not happy. So I went to the UK and went, okay, this life as a nurse, I need to make the benefits while I'm young enough to do this. So I worked over there for 18 months, came back and thought I'll have a break from rotating nights and start working in a cardiac cath lab. So in the cath lab, we did 10-hour shifts. And those 10-hour shifts were normally 8 till 6. And then if we were on call, we would stay until the last list was done for the night. And then we would be on call if there was an emergency heart attack or, suspected heart attack in ED. We would have 30 minutes to get to the hospital and do the procedure and go from there. So whilst I was living in the UK, I had probably 3 months of just doing day shifts for a particular little private practice. And my body, I suddenly went, oh, is this what it feels like for everyone else? This is weird. So I had that complete epiphany of me being really vague all the time, feeling awful all the time, being jet lagged all the time isn't actually normal. That's not how people feel. And I just took for granted that that's how everyone felt. And then I was going, I think it's my night shifts. I'd be doing a 12-hour shift, have 2 days off, then I'm days for 3 days, then go straight into a night shift. And it was like my body was completely all over the place. So working in the cath lab, that was one of the biggest motivators, was to not be doing night shifts. I could do the 4 a.m. on call, quickly run to the hospital, do a quick cath lab or cath, and come home within, an hour or 2 hours. But then sitting back again, I was watching a lot of patients come, and there were the red flags. So the red flags of, I've had chest pain for months, but today it was 10 out of 10 pain and I felt like an elephant was squashing me, versus this is instant, I had no idea it was coming on, etc. So I started looking at the idea of, we need to educate people of how to know when their body is working versus when it's not working, and what the red flag look like. So what's normal and what's not normal when it came to their body. But it wasn't until a dear friend of mine, Nick, who was our wardsman, he would do this a lot. and quite often he just had this niggling headache.
Yep.
We didn't really take it seriously at the time. I remember having one conversation around his headaches, but certainly not thinking it was anything more serious than a random headache or needing to have Panadol.
Yep.
But looking back, it would have been around 6 months that these constant niggling little things were happening for him. And one Friday afternoon, we all say, see you later, have a great weekend. Friday morning or Saturday morning, his partner went out for 10 minutes to get bread and milk, came back, and Nick was dead on the lounge room floor. Now, for him, that little niggling headache was a brain aneurysm. And at the time, I remember that was probably my true epiphany to go, what's my purpose? What am I meant to do? And he was such a dear friend that his death really had a big impact. Even though I worked in that hospital setting and dealt with death and dying a lot, it was so different when someone so suddenly and unexpectedly just dropped dead. And that was the bit that made me question my life choices and made me also question, what do I want to do? And am I passionate about standing here assisting a cardiologist every day? And the answer was no. I didn't find passion from that. I loved education and I loved understanding how our bodies worked and why it was so important that we moved. Now, as a kid, and I don't talk about this publicly, but I think it brings into the space what it looked like for me. As a kid, I was a morbidly obese teenager. So I was around 128 kilos at 15. And at 15, I had this epiphany that my body wasn't working the way it should have. And I lost 50 kilos over 2 years. And all I'd implemented at that point was to stop eating processed foods and to walk every day. There were two things that I did religiously every day. And over that 2-year period, to lose the 50 kilos, it became almost like a religion to go, I don't eat McDonald's, I don't have soft drink. It just was an adaptation to my lifestyle. So then working in nursing and watching how patients' lives were unfolding in this space and in the cath lab, so much of it is preventable if we look at it from a different lens.
Yep.
So 6 weeks later, I ended up resigning from my full-time job after Nick had passed away. And I started studying a diploma of nutrition because I really wanted to start to understand why nutrition had such an impact even on our brain development. And why it was, when we're eating healthy and we're doing all the right things, we're motivated, we're more likely to move, we feel good about ourselves, and how that influences the chronic disease pathways. So at that point, my old bosses, who were the doctors in either intensive care or the cath lab, they're like, Tammy, what are you doing studying nutrition? That's like the White Witch Brigade. What are you doing? And I was like, oh my God, this is part of our bodies. What I don't understand. So it was quite an interesting space. Then when I started Core Health Consulting, my view was that I'd be teaching community groups about their bodies. And I had so much feedback to say, no one cares. No one's going to be interested. They're not going to pay for this education. Are you kidding? I was like, really? Who doesn't want to understand this stuff? Anyway, before I even put out a poster to say, this is a presentation I want to do to the, general public, I had a coal mine contact me. And they basically asked, would I come out and talk about heart health? They'd had another provider there checking heart rates with their thumb, and they were a bit unimpressed, going, we even know that you don't check a pulse with a thumb. So can you just come in and teach us basics about the heart, but let us know, how do we know if a colleague's going to have a heart attack? And that was their main concern. So they'd had a mid 50-year-old who'd presented with chest pain on site in an open coal mine. And it freaked a lot of their colleagues out to go, wow, he was fit, healthy guy, plays golf a lot. He didn't smoke. He wasn't a huge drinker. He was not the typical person they assumed would have a heart attack. So I kind of had a captivated audience. And it all really, it went from there. And it was something that made all the things I'd been thinking about for a number of years start to click in and fundamentally bring to life what we look at and what we ignore and how it can impact our body. And fatigue just happens to be one of those really big themes that we take for granted. We feel a certain way because we don't know how other people are feeling when they're feeling good.
Or how we should be feeling when we're well and healthy. And it sneaks up on you, right? Because it's not just, you wake up tomorrow and you're feeling 10 times worse. It is, you just push yourself a little bit there, or you're a bit more stressed and it adds to it, and you don't recover, you don't recoup. So it's exactly like psychosocial hazards as well. I know fatigue is one in the federal legislation, as we were just talking about, but we need
Yeah,
to look at it as part of psychosocial as well, because it has such a huge impact. But it's just bit by bit, it's niggle by niggle, until all of a sudden your body or your mind just says, I cannot keep holding all of these things. And
exactly.
or we don't listen. As you said, we don't listen to what our body and our mind is saying. We often have the signs of, hey, you need a bit of a break. And look, we are going to chat about that too. I do love your background and the ability for you to look at this so differently than normal fatigue. Not normal fatigue probably isn't the right word, but
Yeah.
normally in normal workplaces, and I mean, you've already done the linkage, right? So shift work and fatigue or long hours is a big part of that. But as you kind of alluded to, it goes so much deeper than that. What do
Yes.
you want to share about what most people misunderstand about fatigue at work?
Well, it was funny with the very first course I was asked to deliver on fatigue was by another coal mine in the Hunter.
Hmm.
And their take on it was, we need to help our guys, but we really don't think circadian rhythms make any difference to them. Like, do not speak in front of our 200 men about the rhythm when they sleep because they don't get it. And I was like, yes, I understand that. Okay. And there's so many more reasons, as you know, as to, yes, circadian rhythm is important and it's interesting to understand, especially to people who get that side of it and the science behind it. And our rapid eye movement sleep is incredibly important for rested sleep. But to the average individual, it doesn't really hit home as to why do I need to know that and how does that influence how my REM sleep is going to be better or not. So I really said to them, I'd like to break it down into real man's language or real person's language around what's our routine look like. And besides being a shift worker, because you have white collar people in this office who feel just as fatigued as your 12-hour rotating rosters out here. So that was the fundamental of, let's look at routine. So first of all, what are you doing nutritionally? Do you eat often enough? Most people don't eat enough, and that's often one of the biggest issues. Or what they do eat is so white, whether it be white bread, very much carbohydrate based. It doesn't give a person energy if they're not getting lots of good nutrients, and the ability to have a very mixed, colorful diet. It's really important. It sounds very basic, but it's something that's a really it's just a fundamental. More color in our diet, the better off we are.
And we forget to do it. So we need to be reminded of these basic things.
Yes, yes, exactly. The recommendations around mental health is that we have to improve a person's mental health 5 to 7 serves of vegetables a day plus 2 pieces of fruit.
Mm.
So, it used to always be your five, standard five, but they're saying research shows 5 to 7 serves is really important. Now, what's a serve? Half a cup of vegetables is one serve, a
Mhm.
cup of salad is a serve. So if you're not having that in your breakfast, in your lunch and your dinner, it's really hard to actually get that much in
Mm.
a one meal. So the idea is to space it out between those. And then your tummy is so nourished with good volume of good calories and healthy nutrient, or healthy calories and good nutrients, that you're not wanting to go and pick at the fridge and get more food because you're
Mm.
content. So
Yeah.
there's a really big, so that's one side of it, the nutrition. But
Mm.
also what's happening to your body if you're not absorbing your nutrients well. So you either have food intolerance or a potential food allergy. And quite often the people I was seeing, that they come in for a one-on-one consult, And they'd say to me, I drink coffee every day. I put milk in the coffee, but man, I feel crap after it. And then I go to the toilet and it's explosive or, or constipated.
Yeah.
And then as a result, it's like, well, you're intolerant potentially to milk. So let's go and get you tested. Let's tick off some boxes. But then that transfers from an allergy or an intolerance to I can't eat wheat. Now I can't eat dairy. And now I'm starting to have all these other limitations. So if there is the red flags to say, I have this reaction when I have these sorts of foods, then or drinks, then we need to go and check out what that is. Diarrhea every day is not normal. Constipation every day is not normal. So, understand nutritionally, if we're having foods or substances that our bodies don't like, it's trying to reject it for a reason, and we need to listen to it.
Yes.
The other side of that is, so then our absorption is poor, so our nutrients is not going to be absorbed, so our energy is crap again. Then the flip side of that is, do I have a medical condition? Is there something else going on medically that is making me tired and lethargic? But because I'm a shift worker, I'll ignore it because I work nights. And I see it with doctors, nurses, miners, engineers, rail drivers, you name it, where if they're shift workers, they will dispel whatever symptoms they're having that could be medical based because they're a shift worker. Or they go to their GP, and if it's not a good GP, they'll say to them, well, you do rotating rosters. It's like, it's not good enough. So the other medical conditions we look at that have a high risk to causing fatigue, things like undiagnosed diabetes, where you're not absorbing your sugars properly, you're not releasing enough insulin, your pancreas isn't working the way it should. So we'd want to get an understanding of what that person's diet looks like to then go, do we need to send them to their GP to get some pathology done to make sure their blood glucose levels are okay and that they're stable. The other is looking at potential sleep apnea. So sleep apnea is so hard to pick up beside the partner saying they snore like a steam train, but it's not the snoring we're worried about, it's the pause. So it's when someone's sounding like they snore, 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 pause, there's not a breath. Then they, poke them at the shoulder and they go, wake up, like 15 seconds, you haven't breathed. That is sleep apnea. So that's the bit we're concerned about.
Yeah.
And when we starve our bodies and our brain from oxygen, that is a huge impact to our heart, which causes high blood pressure. It can then cause diabetes. And then you tend to want to eat more food because you're tired and you're wanting energy. So they say statistically, 73% of people who sleep or get less than 5 hours of quality sleep a night become obese. So they're pretty big stats. Yeah. So with sleep apnea, it can be something as simple as the person has an anatomical shift. So it could have been that they broke their nose or their jaw when they were young, playing sport. Less likely their jaw, but it can dislocate. It could just be that deviated septum if they had a broken nose. And if that's fixed, that could be a simple surgery. For others, it might be that they just need to lose a bit of weight. That can make a huge difference. For others, it's a mouth splint that helps to prop the jaw forward a little bit by a couple of mil, and that can open up the airway when they're asleep. Yeah. And for others, they're going to need a CPAP machine, which means it will help give positive airway pressure when they're asleep to open up the airway. Because what happens when a person's sleeping and they have sleep apnea, we have this beautiful little respiratory center in the back of our brain, in the cerebellum. And it wakes us up subconsciously when you're fast asleep and you hold your breath for, let's say, 15, 20 seconds. Suddenly it says, hello, I'm starving of oxygen. Wake up. So then you wake up, take a big deep breath, and then you go back to sleep. Every time our brain does that and wakes us up, you do not go into your full REM, your rapid eye movement sleep. So you don't get your quality rested sleep because you've had to wake up subconsciously, you don't even know you've done it, to take in that big deep breath.
Yeah.
And you start to go back into a sleep cycle again. And if you pause again, it'll do it again. So a person will say to me, you know, I went to sleep. I normally go to sleep at 9:30. I wake up at 5. That should be enough. But if they've got sleep apnea and it's undiagnosed, then they're
Mm.
not getting quality sleep.
So do you do individual consults as well?
Yeah, in the workplace, I used to. I haven't done them for a while just because
Mm.
I got quite busy with mental health first aid.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things where I was starting, not starting. I used to run a project, a program called Project Health. So I
Hmm.
did fatigue training in a workplace, and then this one organization, they got me in for 12 weeks, and they said, we just want you to do a plan. Anyone after they talk, like listen to your fatigue talk,
Mm.
and they come and see you. So that 12-week program ended up going on for 4 years. And what started with one little group became 3 of their departments. So it was quite extraordinary. But
That's awesome.
yeah, this is sort of what led us to, it's never just about the fatigue or lack of sleep or shifts.
Mm.
You know, that's,
Yes.
we have to get our head around this.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, if sleep apnea was an issue, that's another thing we need to factor in. When it comes to also having things like blood in the stool, that was another big factor where, and this is often common for women in their 30s to 40s, they'll, not the blood in the stool, but I'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah.
So they'll turn up, they say, I'm just really tired. Well, you've got two kids or 3 kids, or you work 40 to 50 or 60 hours a week.
Yeah.
There's reason for you to be tired. A good GP, again, will say, let's do some bloods. We'll work out what's going on for you. Again, they could present with that lethargy, feeling flat, almost could look like they have depression if you
Mm.
clinically looked at those symptoms
Yeah.
of what they say. Then the pathology comes back and they're anemic. Okay, so why are you anemic? Let's have a look at what's going on for you.
Mm.
Again, a good GP would refer them to a gastroenterologist to say, let's have a look at the bowel. Let's see what's going on with the gut. And potentially, that is when something like bowel polyps or bowel tumors can be picked up. And that is what led me into working with Bowel Cancer Australia. So when I
Mm.
was writing The Real Man's Toolbox, I was talking to the CEO a lot when I was writing my chapter on bowel health.
Hmm.
And when the book was published in 2009, he contacted me after it, Julian Wiggins, and said, Tammy, we want you to set up patient services for our organisation. At the moment, me and my secretary take calls. We are not medical. We're well out of our depth in this space. So
Yeah.
I worked with them till 2018 in setting up the patient services to get nurses and nutritionists, and now it's expanded again into the government funding. So they've done amazing. But that's so many of the symptoms that so many people would come to us with was lethargy. I'm
Mm.
tired. And then they've gotten a diagnosis that was a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's just so many avenues with fatigue that we want to look at the bigger picture and understand what's going on for that person. And
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor, I'm a registered nurse. And my thing was, it's a roadmap. Let
Mm.
let me understand what is going on for you, what's the story, and let's direct you to the right professionals that can support you.
Mm.
So when it came to then blood in the stool, I remember for Bowel Cancer Australia, I flew over to Western Australia, spoke to 30, there were 3,000 miners in one of the mines up in the top part of WA. And out of that 3,000, I spoke to 25 men who were actively bleeding
Mm.
and had done for months,
Yeah.
3 months, maybe 12 months. And so many of them said to me, yeah, but it's probably hemorrhoids, or it's because I'm a shift worker.
We're
What the?
self-diagnosing and we're trying to give reasons. We need to look into root causes, not what we think the assumption of the reason is.
Yes.
We get it so wrong sometimes. Sometimes we're spot on, but we get it wrong sometimes. So, and when it comes to health, we really can't play
But
with that.
this is the beauty around workplaces, and this is where the power of a workplace can step in, because you have a captivated audience when you have employees listening to wellbeing presentations. And, back in the day, a lot of people would say to me, men don't care about their health. Well, that's complete and utter rubbish, because every time I've worked with men and women, they are engaged. Women are more likely to go and see a doctor or to talk to someone about their concerns than what men are.
Mm.
Yes, but men are willing to talk when they've got someone willing to listen. And when it comes to a workplace, a good culture will say, go and take time off, get to your appointment.
Yep.
So, one thing I would always see when it came to someone with that niggling chest pain, if they didn't go off when they had the red flags, which
Mm.
could have been one sick day, they ended up having 6 weeks off
Mm.
because they're now recovering from either open heart surgery because they couldn't get a stent, they needed bypass surgery, or they've needed minimum 2 weeks off because they've had to go into a cath lab and get a stent in their heart because no one's looked at the bigger picture sooner. So workplaces, when you have the right culture and the right leadership, they see that being proactive, it is so much more affordable for them than wait till something happens and then the person that they really needed on site is no longer capable for working, whether it be a month, 2 months, or even if something more serious could happen.
Yeah.
So it's got to be about being proactive, not reactive
Yeah.
to all things health. And when it's fatigue, if it's an accident, and I know we talk about micro sleeps, and that's the reason why big operations need to go and have fatigue checks, but it's about the everyday stuff. It could be a human mistake that can obliterate an entire crew of people
Mm.
purely because they're not focused, their mind wasn't on the job, but they've got all this other lingering stuff in the background that's happening for them.
Yeah. And look, we've talked about some of the red flags, like bleeding and illness and health issues. But what are some of those everyday behaviors that, like, I
Yeah.
know for me, my signs of I haven't had enough sleep is exactly like a 3-year-old kid. I roll
Tantrums?
my eyes
Angry?
and I get angry and
Yeah.
cranky really easily because the rope isn't there. The rope is quite small because I am one of those people. I bed at 9:30, up with the sun. So in winter it's later, in summer it's earlier, and
Yeah.
I love that. I do need to chat to you about some other things after this call
Yeah.
because you've highlighted some things for me. But what else should we be looking for? What should workers be looking for in that everyday behavior of themselves and their workmates?
So it's things like the irritability, like you're saying, just that frustrated and things aren't working for them. It could be simple as you're waking up still tired. So you
Mm.
wake up not wanting to get out of bed, which so many parents I talk to, they go, that's me every day. But again, we've got to look at our sleep hygiene. What's our routine look like? Do we go to bed with the iPad next to us? And I can be victim of doing this stuff. When I just want to watch a show that I haven't been able to watch until I put my son to sleep, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But it's understanding, what do you do? Or are you scrolling in your bed on your phone? Understanding, how do we disconnect?
Mm.
What does that look like? Um, so the other signs might be you want to eat more food because you're actually tired, or you eat less because you don't have the motivation to go and be bothered to cook and to
Mm.
make something healthy. It might be that quick, easy grab. For others, they find that when they're tired, they'll sit down, they'll have a few wines, and it makes them, they think, feel better,
Mm.
but then their sleep is poorer for
Yeah.
it. So it's getting to know, do I actually have a routine when it comes to sleep? Do I make it dark enough? Do I get rid of, I've heard a number of speakers in fatigue talk, and uh, it's so true. They say, the bedroom is purely for sleep and sex, and that is it. Take out everything else.
Yeah.
And that is the fundamental of getting back to basics of, it's not another room to go and watch TV in. It's got to be your sanctuary. It
Yeah.
has to be that quiet space where you can just feel at peace. Don't have your phone next to you so that you listen to every alert or every notification from every group you're part of, or chat
Airplane
lines,
mode.
or
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. It might also be a symptom that's also really common is just feeling like you can't be bothered, just no motivation.
Yeah.
And it might be, I just don't want to exercise because I don't have the energy to do it.
Mm.
Or I don't have the energy to get up early enough to fit in the gym. And that again can be something that's so common, and many people will say that, but they just take for granted that, yeah, even if you just get up 20 minutes earlier, go for a walk around the block, doesn't have to be a full gym routine, but just to move for that very first part of the day, challenge yourself to do that for a week. Just go, wow, I actually start the day feeling better.
Yes. Well, how does things like a lack of exercise compound fatigue? We've talked a little bit about nutrition and sleep, but what about the movement side of things?
Yep.
Does
So when we have these really big glycogen stores, or it's the muscles that store a lot of glucose in your thighs or your quads. And when you start to move and you activate your glycogen stores, you're starting to release energy. And you're moving them now, I can see. But it's something that you will, when you start to move glucose around, you using it, it's no longer storing. So that can help make a person feel more energized without stored glucose, which then converts to fat if we don't utilize it. But also, if we're moving, it burns cortisol. So the more stressed and impacted we feel, the more cortisol levels rise. And then if we don't move or burn that negative energy off, then it stays and stores. And that depletes your adrenal glands as well. So your adrenals sit on the top of your kidneys. And if you could imagine, they look like grapes. If you use your adrenal glands actively all the time to build cortisol, because you're on the go, it's stress, stress, stress all the time, don't have time to stop and eat, got to go home, got to finish this email, then I'm going to work on this tonight, then I'll go to bed, and it can go like that.
Yep.
Then suddenly your adrenal glands start to look more like sultanas. They're no longer grapes. They start to go, hello, can someone pay attention to me? So then your immune system starts to deplete, because the immune system's going, you need to rest. To make you rest, I'm going to give you a cold, and you're going to feel really crap, so that hopefully you'll listen to me and you'll lay in bed and you'll get that replenishment that you need in order to get your adrenal glands back to where they need to be. And that's something where rest and sleep is incredibly important. Hydration is incredibly important. But movement can really start to help to burn off those the negatives of adrenaline and cortisol, and all those things we take for granted is just a busy day, but you've got to have that release, and it's really good for our mental health, but it's also really good for our body and our heart.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And you make me feel like I need to go run around the block. Not the block. The block here is too big.
No, but it's not, and this is certainly not to make people feel bad by it at all. But it starts when you start to understand how our bodies work, you start to go, okay, there's a reason I need to actually do this. And that's why so many of the men and women would come to Project Health, because they're like, now it makes sense.
Yes.
And that's why I wrote the Real Man's Toolbox, because I wanted people to know, why do you take blood pressure? Why do you care? Yes, thank you for spruiking the but it's, what does blood pressure actually mean to someone? And when I referred it to a tire pressure in a car, when you have optimum tire pressure, your car performs better and it will go the distance and it's less likely to stop you. Same thing applies with your heart. If we have our heart running at the right pressures where it should be, because we can't see it, we can't see damage being done.
Yes.
So that's the reason why we want to do things like a basic blood pressure. What's it mean? What's that top number and the bottom number actually mean?
Yeah.
And just get back to why we need to understand how our bodies work, but why things as simple as nutrition and activity and sleep can make a huge difference.
Definitely. And just so this doesn't turn into a consult, because I'm like, my blood pressure is always quite low. Let's get back to the workplace.
Yes, yes.
Um, Culture has a huge part to play, and it can either fuel or reduce fatigue. How does it do that?
So one thing I find with let's start with a bad work culture, what that can look like.
Yeah.
When the person doesn't disconnect because they're expected to always be on, and I see it more in smaller organizations where, you know, it might be 50 employees, but if they send an email to me tonight, I should really respond because we need this stuff done by tomorrow, and he was going to work on that tonight. I've
Yeah.
seen others where I remember one guy, and I couldn't believe it. He was permanently on call 24/7 in his role. Like, that is unheard of, and it's illegal.
Yep.
No, what the?
Yeah.
Again, it was a organization with over 1,000 employees, but he was the one guy that did the role he did. And I said to him and his boss, it's not sustainable. This guy would sit there and he's trembling because his entire nervous system was shot, and he was at the very a close realm to a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
But it's something that the culture expected, not to have to pay for another person to replace this man or to have another skill set that mirrored what he could do. And therefore there was a huge cultural issue there, a big problem.
As soon as he falls over, you're going to need to employ two people
Yeah,
to do, like,
that's
it
exactly
doesn't
right.
make sense. We have to look at the big picture here. Yeah.
That's right. That scenario was 13 years ago, but I never forget. And we had a very serious conversation with it. It certainly escalated because I was really worried about his mental health,
Yeah.
because the impact on him and his family. His wife was over it. The kids
Yeah.
didn't get dad time at all because he was living off a phone and looking at a computer all the time. So it's really expectation. So when a person leaves the work site, ideally they clock off. They should be going home and actually having a life again. That's whether it's the exercise, going to the movies, whether it's whatever they want to do, but it can't be work related. Might be a hobby that brings them joy and they can focus on that, but it's a different, it starts to take different priorities in the brain, and it takes away the pressure and that stress element to the work role. A positive culture will be more places that believe in breaks. So they make sure people have at least a lunch break. They're not sitting at their desk to do it, unless the person actually wants to sit at the desk while they're doing something, you know, like watching a podcast or whatever it might be. So, but it's something that can be, so the culture of expectation to do that. I work with so many amazing clients that they even have walking meetings.
Yes.
They get up and walk around their car park that's designated for a proper walking meeting. So 3 of them can walk and nut out some issues whilst not sitting at a desk, just to alleviate, have a look, get some fresh air, have a look around the site, whatever it might be. Others, it is the expectation that they're just not multitasking at 100 miles an hour. You know, that's an important thing too, where there's reasonable time frames, and the work role that they're doing is not for 2 other people. It's for one role.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think when we look at a negative work culture, it can come from, what is the well-being look like for the boss and for the leaders under them. So it has to start at the top. And I know we always talk about this, but if the leaders don't get it, that filters down into the employees or the supervisors, whoever that might be, who then support employees, and it becomes a very negative culture. And that's where we hear as we heard from Patrizia the other day in her amazing talk about her son Christopher, was she'll be right. The she'll be right attitude comes in, because the fear that we're going to take up more time because we don't have time to do the right thing, and either they can't be bothered because they don't have time. And the work culture part is, even if he's tired, he's got to get the job done.
Mm,
And it's just not good enough. And it doesn't have to even be in a workplace with dangerous settings.
yeah.
It can literally be the person sitting at the desk where, you know, a dear friend of mine, I'm not going to out her in this publicly, but I remember her telling me she had not slept for, it was a period when the fires were happening 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And she said her sleep was bad. She was also managing two small kids, and the workplace was piling up her workload that she was struggling to get done. She accidentally deleted a major file that they'd worked on for 18 months. She said, Tammy, we couldn't even retrieve it. Like, we
Oh
couldn't get it
no.
back. Like,
Oh,
monumental. She's like, 18 months of work. We'd worked on this database. I was like, oh, that's tear worthy.
yeah.
And those sort of scenarios are, it can sound so simple to someone not working on it, but it's so many hours. And but again, fatigue.
Yeah.
People weren't managing to support her in that role. And it was a really, because they were working so heavily with the fires and supporting government agencies, it was a really
Yeah.
big issue.
And we do that. We tend to put other people ahead of our own, right? Like I remember, sorry, I was just looking out because my chicken is yelling. I'm just making sure there's no goannas.
Oh gosh.
It's coming away from that weather, but I think she's just wants to come out. So
Oh wow,
she
that's
likes to
amazing.
tell me when there's something attacking her or
Again, a red flag. So you're listening for it. Good girl.
but I remember when I worked and supported seriously injured workers, people who were injured on the road and in sport, I put their well-being ahead of my own, and it led to burnout.
Yeah,
So, yeah, sometimes we are doing brain surgery, heart surgery. There are big things that we need to do, but we can't do a great job
yeah,
if we're not mentally and physically well. So, you want
that's right.
someone who's working on you and supporting you to be well.
Exactly.
And sorry, you go.
But also to follow the look at what I do, not what I say.
Yeah,
That's the other piece to that puzzle too. And from a leader's perspective, they can be telling them to do everything right. But when they're not themselves, and everyone goes, well, look at him. He's on site for 15 hours.
yeah.
And yeah, I'll give you one example of a mine site that I worked at in teaching fatigue, which is quite interesting.
Mm,
So the operations manager wanted me to come on site to teach fatigue. This is a number of years ago, by the way. And he logged us on at 6:30 as we drive through the gates. And I logged out at 11:30 p.m. So we together had been there from 6:30 to 11:30 p.m. to try and cover off, in his words, as many as the day and the night crews as we could. And at that point, that was when I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, this is day one. I'm here for 4 days. What's your expectation? Because this is not possible. And you're
yeah,
teaching fatigue, and I'm slurring by the end of this at 10 p.m. because I'd been here since 6:30 a.m. And I
yeah,
was like, mate, like what, where's your head at? And that's the leadership part has to have a part to play. So
yeah,
now I won't go onto site and do any more than 3 90-minute presentations in a day because it goes against my fatigue policy when we're talking about, practice what you preach.
yeah,
You cannot stay for, I don't even know how many hours that was, nearly 15 hours or something. But I
yeah,
said to him, with your fatigue policy, why, with your card, what happens when you've logged on and then you log off that many hours later? He said, oh, no, our system's interesting. It reboots itself at 12 hours. So it didn't even, like,
not registering.
why even have that, So this was, it was and they were open to my feedback, but that was a really big indicator that you've got me here talking on fatigue
Yeah,
and speaking to all of your crews, but everything you've just shown me is red flags.
yeah.
You're not practicing what you're preaching. And you guys, it has to start from you in order for it to filter down
Yeah.
and in order for you to follow your own policy.
That's what I was going to say.
Like,
Follow
oh my
your own
gosh,
policy.
crazy.
So putting it in the workers' hands, what are some of the immediate things they can do to manage or reduce fatigue?
Yep. So to manage or reduce fatigue, look at your own routine.
Yeah.
Understand what you do. How much water do you drink? It's understanding how much water do I actually drink to help my little adrenal glands, go from being a sultana when I've used up all my adrenaline as well. But
Yeah.
we need to hydrate our body, which hydrates our cells, which makes our cells talking to each other, makes us more likely to want to move and feel better. That's number one.
Yeah.
So hydration's a really big one. What time do you go to bed? What's it look like when you go to bed? Do you have distractions? Are you doing things like reading or listening to a meditation or something that puts your mind at ease? So those things, what does the lights look like in your house? And many sleep experts will say start to dim the lights down an hour before you're going to bed. There are some really simple practices that you can do 20 minutes before you're going to sleep, where it's just dimming the lights, having a shower or a bath, if that signifies for you that you're ending your day. Not watching something too up, adrenal focus, like a thriller or something a bit scary where your mind's going to go tick, tick, tick when you're going to bed, but something that's a little bit more calming. What time do you wake up in the morning? Have you actually had enough sleep? Are you going to bed early enough to make sure that you get enough sleep? The average adult should be sleeping between 7 to 9 hours. Not everyone needs that, but that's the recommendation.
Yeah.
And then again, looking at, have you planned out what you're eating that day? So do you have a packed lunch if you're leaving for work so that you don't have to walk to the cafe and spend, $25 a hit, whatever that might be? And many people I used to talk to in Project Health would bring a loaf of bread and peanut butter sandwiches all day. Like it's good, but it's not great, and that's the bit where we just need to start to look at what are simple ways to make our life really easy. And if it meant literally on a Sunday afternoon, pre-doing a lot of your meals for the week so that you've got time, and time management's a big factor.
Yep.
Then have it so that all you got to do is grab a piece of fruit, get your container, even if it's frozen, for lunch, for your workplace, whack it in the microwave, and you're done. But it's something that you just get into a routine. I think routine's a really, really big one. Look at what you're doing and then look at how you can simplify it.
Yeah. And what about the organizations? What can they do to move beyond that tick box training and actually create real change?
Yeah. So think really understanding what their policy looks like, understanding what does it mean when we ask people to turn off from work? Are they turning off? Do we actually have an embedded culture where people are working after hours? And that's okay and I know a lot of workplaces who are very flexible, will let people go home, pick up their kids early from school, and then they do that additional 1 or 2 hours later. But it's making sure that that's where it's capped, not another 3 hours or 4 hours on top of. It's really understanding, what does my work day look like? Can I switch off from that? So workplaces who actually allow well-being, whether it's well-being focused conversations or programs in a workplace, that's great. But having the flexibility to allow someone to go to a doctor for an appointment or to do a telehealth appointment, whatever that might be as well, to be proactive rather than reactive is a really big tick, because that's a genuine care. You've got to get stuff sorted out.
Yes.
The other is even just having different, and you just need a champion for this. You don't need to pay well-being consultants like myself to come into a workplace to do this, but you need a champion to want to go, right, who's going to walk so many steps for the month? And actually push that where it becomes a positive movement within the workplace or the team, and
Mm.
people actually turn up and have a laugh and go, yeah, well, I did 10,000 steps yesterday afternoon because I sat on my butt all day yesterday. You know,
Yeah.
it's just often they're the leaders within your group that you want,
Yes.
that they just make it happen.
Yeah.
And quite often, so many organizations would say to me, the problem is we pay a gym membership, and the fit guys, they're the ones that go to the gym. We want everyone to go to the gym. So it's, again, we need to increase our health literacy,
Hmm.
talk to people on their level so it clicks,
Yeah.
and make them realize why it's important to them and how their body and their health do matter. But
Mm.
what is it that they're doing as an individual that can improve their lifestyle?
Yeah.
It's not about work, it's about the person. And, I've got this little thing that I always put on the end of our videos. We did a whole bunch of health-based videos for a client, and the captured line is, it's your body, it's your health, it's your responsibility. And that is where we need to put it. It is our responsibility, but we can only do what we understand.
Yes.
So you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. And I think this pod has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your knowledge and looking at it from such a different angle, because people do glaze over when you talk about fatigue. It's the long hours, it's the shift work, check, we make sure that we don't have those things. But, and we've heard it all before: eat well, drink enough, make sure you're moving. But why is we do more when we understand the reasons and the benefits and the potential risks. So this has been
Absolutely.
incredible. Thank you so much. I know that there's going to be, so many more opportunities for us to chat about so many more things. But for people who are listening that want to learn more about you and find out more, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Thanks, Nicole. Look, so my website is obviously www.corehealthconsulting.com.au.
Mhm.
So there you can either email me or jump on a booking to have a 15-minute chat to say what you're thinking you need and get an idea of where you're wanting to go with your organization,
Mhm.
or even for yourself. I don't tend to do one-on-one consultations anymore. It's more for workplaces,
Yeah.
just because life was so busy when I was doing that.
Yeah.
But now I'm teaching a lot of mental health first aid. I'm now teaching a lot of resilience training as well,
Yeah.
which starts to bring in all of these different areas. So yes, please go to my website and you can certainly contact me. Happy to chat over the phone or have a Zoom meeting, no problem.
Fantastic. Again, thank you so much, Tammy. I really appreciate it. And for listeners, if you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe and share it with your friends and your work colleagues. We'll see you next time on Under the Rug at Work, where we continue to shine light on issues that are too often overlooked.